And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and good luck building around any of these commanders. I just made a video, my last video, in fact, talking about the most underrated commanders in the format, commanders that I think deserve more attention. They're great build-arounds. Now I'm going in the other direction. These are all commanders that, man, I just think they're impossible to build around. I mean, nothing's impossible, of course. But for me, as someone who goes after those underwhelming commanders, who prides himself on finding ways to build around underwhelming commanders, these are ones that even for me, I'm just like, I wouldn't even know what to do here. And I will point out, as always, if you are one of these people who are building these decks, and none of these commanders have 0 decks on EDH Rec, so someone is building around them. I applaud you if you are. Please let me know in the comments below if you are and what exactly you are doing. I will first point out that I am not going to be including any commanders where there just really is nothing to build at all, particularly the vanilla commanders. If you have a commander that has nothing to build around, then, I mean, there's not really much point in talking about it. There are a few vanilla commanders out there, particularly the ones from the original Legend set. They're awful, obviously. There's nothing to build around. There isn't much point in talking about them. There also is a lot of commanders that are just like a 5/5 creature with trample or something, where again, I guess you could build a Voltron deck with them. I don't know why you would. Some of them are just downright awful. I will bring up Veldrain of Sengir here. This guy is just a terrible creature all around. 5 black, 5/5. He is a 7 mana 5/5. But hold on a sec. You can pay 1 black to give him Forest Walk and -3, -0 until end of turn. Homelands was notoriously bad for having, just notoriously bad in general, that set was, but the legendary creatures in particular are awful. People are playing this deck, this 26 decks on EDH Rec, apparently. Funny enough, there is actually something you can do here. Because your commander can gain Forest Walk, even though it's only a 2/5. You can build around, you can put stuff on it, equipment and whatnot, and it can be unblockable. We do have Yamamaya Cradle of Growth now, right? That is a card, and in mono black, I can very easily go tutor for it, put it into play, and my commander will be unblockable. It is still a incredibly, I mean, there's got to be at least just in mono black alone, 100 commanders that are better in a Voltron strategy than that. Again, I applaud you if you are doing so, but I'm not including commanders like this in this list for the exact reason that I just went through, some things that you actually can do. You can actually build around that ability, as bad as it is. Right? So I'm gonna, as I'm doing this, go through the process of why I included the commanders that I did, because as a deck builder, I'm looking at it and going, I just don't even know, like, is it even worth it? Is it even worth it to jump through all those hoops to get a Yavimaya in play so you can attack with your 2/5 commander? I don't think it is. But as we get down the list, it gets worse and worse to the point where, yeah, maybe there's something that this commander is doing that you could build around, but why would you ever do it? I don't know. Alexis Zephyr Mage is probably the best example of this. This is one that originally I included in the list. And then I thought, no, man, there's some interesting things you can do here. And then I was like, no, maybe not. Like I sort of went back and forth on it quite a bit. So 3 blue, human spell shaper, 3/3. X and a blue, and tap, discard 2 cards, return X target creatures to their owner's hand. So that is just a terrible ability. I mean, there's something you can build around here. Certainly, your commander's bouncing creatures, your commander, you have a discard outlet. You can do a little bit of discard theme here. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I just don't know. Like, I would never go through the trouble of doing this. Basically, because of what your commander is doing, I don't think it works, right? So first of all, because you're discarding 2 cards, you have to make it worth it. I'm not going to pay X is 2 here. If X is 2, I just discarded 2 cards and paid 3 mana and tapped my commander to bounce 2 creatures. That's terrible, right? Why would you ever do that? Yeah, you can do it, but why would you ever do it? That plays into it as well. Yes, any commander is build aroundable, but why would you ever build around it? These are commanders that, for me, all the hoops you're jumping through is not even worth the payoff of what you're getting. If you get a bigger number here, let's say X is 5, right? I want to make it actually worth it here to bounce a bunch of creatures if I'm going to discard 2 cards. So X is 5, now I'm paying 6 mana. And 6 mana works, of course, because your commander costs 5. So I paid 5 mana for my commander, waited a whole nother turn, paid 6 mana, basically tapped out on my turn, and discarded 2 cards just so I could bounce 5 creatures to owner's hand. Again, the payoff doesn't seem worth it for me. On top of all of that, you've annoyed all your opponents by bouncing all their creatures to owner's hands. You've slowed them down by a little bit, but also annoyed them. Your commander is going to immediately die. Then you have to pay 7 for it. It's got a tap ability, so you got to wait another turn. Again, this is a commander whose ability you likely will only use once in an entire game, and all you're going to do is annoy your opponents. It's one of those commanders that fits into the category of people will see it and it's almost laughable when they see it, but when you actually get to use the ability, it annoys them, so they want to kill it. It's in that weird sort of, the Venn diagram crosses over a little bit there with this commander where, yeah, it sucks, but it's also annoying. Discarding 2 cards is horrible, so it's a terrible card disadvantage. Even if you get to a situation where you can be using this ability a lot, you're going to be discarding your whole hand, so that doesn't seem very good either. I even was thinking, again, I'm turning the wheels trying to figure out how to make this commander good. What if you bounced your commander? One of those creatures that you're bouncing to hand, because of course you can do it on your own creatures. What if I activate this ability, bounce my commander back to my hand, so that now I don't have to worry about it getting removed? I have a Lightning Greaves in play or a 1,000-Year Elixir, so I can play my commander, use the ability right away. Okay, but my commander costs 5, and then I gotta play it and have enough mana left over to use the ability. And then again, all of that work. I mean, I can really go down the road here. I got an Aether Vial in play, right? Again, this is how I work. I can make it work. I can have an Aether Vial so I can put it on 5 and have my commander come into play for free so I can use it again, and the 1,000-Year Elixir and the Lightning Greaves so I can use the ability right away. Okay, but all of that work, all you're doing is just discarding more and more cards. Again, the more you use your commander's ability, the worse it gets for you because you have to discard 2 cards every time. And then on top of that, you're just annoying the crap out of all your opponents, and they're just going to end up killing you, right? You can't bounce all their creatures. You can only bounce a few of them. And so they're just going to end up killing you. So all that ends up happening is I'm going to jump through all of these hoops to make this commander good, only to annoy all my opponents and have them kill me. Doesn't seem like a great game plan. So yeah, this is a commander you can build around, but I don't know why would you want to, right? That's basically what I'm getting at here with this video. Riven Turnbull is not a vanilla creature, but it might as well be. So 5 blue and a black, human advisor, 5/7. So a 5/7 creature for 7. Of course, that's terrible. It is a mana dork. It taps to add a black. Of course, it's very unique. There's obviously not a lot of non-green mana dork creatures, but what makes this guy essentially, I don't know why you would ever want to. Again, I'm sure people could come up with janky decks, and maybe your deck is a advisor tribal and Dimir colors or something like that. But as far as actually building around your commander, it's a mana dork. And it's a 7 mana dork. Why would you need a mana dork that costs 7 mana? That's absurd. You're going to need a bunch of mana dorks and mana rocks just to get your commander out so that you can then tap it for 1 black mana. I don't know. Again, why would you ever want to build around this? I sure wouldn't. Stangg. Stangg is a commander that I actually did build around. This was in the era of I'm just trying to find the most unpopular commanders imaginable to build around. Because first of all, I saw it as a challenge. Again, so I've gone down this road. But also, I didn't make myself a target. I thought that was a great game plan, and I still do, okay? I switched to Dragonlord Atarka because Stangg was just so useless. I was just like, man, I need a commander that does something. And Dragonlord Jamoka was, creature removal. I get to shoot my opponent's creatures. It also was a big creature that I could smash my opponents with. And that was an ETB deck. That's what the deck did. That's why I had Stangg as the commander. I'm like, how can I make this commander work? Again, I've gone down this road of trying to make this commander work, but this is one of those commanders that is just so awful. It almost hoses itself. Right? It's from a bygone era where getting 2, 3, 4 creatures for 6 mana was actually considered good. So it's 4 red and a green human warrior 3/4. It enters the battlefield and you create a Stangg twin, legendary Stangg twin. It is important that it's a legendary, so you can't build around that really. It's also a 3/4 red and green human warrior creature token. And you exile that token, not even a sacrifice, you exile the token if the Stangg leaves the battlefield, and you sacrifice Stangg if the token leaves the battlefield. So you can't even blink this or anything like that. None of that works with this guy because the token leaves if your commander leaves, and if your commander leaves, the token also gets exiled. So there really is no way to play around that. That part of it really hoses itself. At least if you could blink this guy and keep making tokens over and over or something, there'd be something there to build around. Getting 6 power for 6 mana is obviously not very good at all. Can't populate at all because, of course, the token is legendary. I mean, again, there's a little bit you could work around. I could put a mirror box in here, so then I can start to... Okay, but again, that's one card in the 99, and your commander isn't even good with that. And even doing all that, jumping through all those hoops, all I'm making is a bunch of 3/4 tokens, which isn't good at all. The only way I just found out to make this commander really usable is with a greater good. That was the one card that I had in the deck that I thought actually worked great with the commander, where I could, in response to any removal or in response to sacrificing it itself, I could sacrifice the Stangg token. Then the sacrificing of my commander, that ability would go on the stack, and in response, I could sacrifice that as well to my greater good. But you see where like all of that work for what? I've just paid 6 mana and sacrificed my commander so that I could draw 6 cards and discard 6 cards. So that wasn't even, like, it's not even worth it. All the hoops you're jumping through here, not even worth it. Let me know if you got a Stangg deck. If you got a Stangg deck that you actually like and you do some neat things with it, I'd love to know, because I used to have one and it didn't work very well. Akuta, Born of Ash. I got a few Kamigawa commanders here in a row, and of course the original Kamigawa block was great for commander. There's a ton of commander staples that were originally printed, and a ton of commanders originally printed from that set, because of course it was a legendary themed set. So for that reason, a lot of great cards for commander. But because they had so many legendary creatures, there's a whole bunch that are just awful and almost, I don't want to say unplayable, but almost unplayable. And again, I'm just trying to figure out how I would build this deck, and I can't really come up with it. So this guy is 2 black, spirit, 3/2 with haste. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have more cards in hand than each opponent, you may sacrifice a swamp. If you do, return Akuta, Born of Ash from graveyard to the battlefield. So again, this is one of those scenarios where, yeah, you can figure out how to build around this. Sure, everyone's saying, well, obviously, we know what we're going to do here. We want to have our opponents discard cards, so they have less cards in hand than me. So I already have that stipulation that I have to build around. But what's the payoff? The payoff is not worth it, right? Again, the juice is not worth the squeeze here. I am going to build a deck around trying to get my Akuta, Born of Ash out of my graveyard for what? It's just a 3/2 creature with haste. That's terrible in commander. That's not even worth building around. It's not even worth putting swords on this guy and whatnot. Like, why would you want to? I'd have to re-equip the swords every time my commander dies. That's not worth it. Right? So a Voltron strategy is not even good here, because, oh, well, it's a good Voltron commander because when it dies, I can get it back. Okay, but then you have to re-equip everything. Having a 3/2 creature with haste is terrible as a Voltron commander. It's going to take you 7 combats to get commander damage with this guy. You got to put stuff on it. And of course, if it's dying, then that undoes the combat thing, right? On top of that, I got to sacrifice a swamp. And on top of that, I got to make sure my opponents have less cards in hand than me. You have to have more cards in hand than each opponent. All 3 of your opponents have to have less cards in hand, and you have to sacrifice a swamp. And the payoff is I get my commander out of my graveyard. I mean, I guess you can sacrifice it to something. But even there's not a lot of payoff for that either. Just sacrificing my commander over and over again. You could just use a resembling skeleton or something, I guess. But it just doesn't seem worth it. There's easier ways to get creatures out of graveyards than having to make sure your opponents have less cards in hand than you, and also sacrificing a swamp. Doesn't seem worth it to me. Arashi, Sky Asunder. This is a funny one because this actually got reprinted in Commander 2021, and I'm not sure why. It's a terrible commander for a very specific reason. 3 green, spirit, 5/5. Pay X and a green and tap. Arashi, Sky Asunder deals X damage to our creature with flying. Funny enough, similar to Alexi, where we have a 5 mana commander with a tap ability. So I got to wait till, I can get this out, I guess not turn 5 because you're in green. So you can get it out a little quicker. Okay. But now I have a 5/5 creature that all it can do is kill target creature with flying. How often am I going to be using that? Like never, right? There's really nothing to build around here. The only card that you can use to build around here that I am aware of is Predator Flagship, which funny enough used to be a commander staple. This is a card in colorless form, so you can include it in your green deck that will give your opponent's creatures flying. Pay 2, target creature gains flying until end of turn. So again, there is something we can build around here, but why would you ever do this, guys? You're going to pay 2 mana to give that creature flying, and then you're going to pay another, let's say it's a 5 creature itself. I'm going to pay 6 mana to kill it. So now I have to pay 8 total mana just to kill one of my opponent's creatures. Again, there's something you can do here, but why would you ever do that? That's such a ridiculous amount of work just to kill one of your opponent's creatures. Hold on though, we've got something else here. This has a channel ability, X green, and discard Arashi. Arashi deals X damage to each creature with flying, which, again, It's a little bit better, but now I have to discard my commander, which means I have to have it in my hand. So now I have to jump through all those hoops. And again, we're jumping through all of these hoops for the payoff to be maybe my opponents are playing Angel Tribal or something, right? I guess, if you wanted to be real goofy and you have a, guy in your pod that plays Angel Tribal, a Gyata deck, and you have another guy that plays maybe a Dragon Tribal deck, now is it worth it? Even with that scenario, is it worth it to jump through all of those hoops if I get my commander into my hand and then I discard it? And again, Angels and Dragons are pretty big, so X has got to be at least 5 here. I'm spending 7 mana just to do a kind of board wipe with my commander. And then I got to get it out of my graveyard and do it again. Even in that very specific scenario, it doesn't seem worth it at all. Brothers Yamazaki, yes, I know a lot of people are going to probably say, just have 2 of them in the command zone, which you could. But just on its face, not a great commander for obvious reasons, right? 2 in a red human samurai, 2/1 with Bushido 1. If there are exactly 2 permanents named Brothers Yamazaki on the battlefield, the legend rule doesn't apply to them. And each other creature named Brothers Yamazaki gets +2/+2 and has haste. So again, we're in the scenario of, this is in 2 different scenarios. Obviously, you can only have 1 in the command zone. You could maybe have your playgroup rule 0 it. I would be totally fine with it. And why would I be totally fine with it? Because again, the payoff is totally not worth it. Even if you had both Brothers Yamazaki in the command zone and you cast them both, all you're getting is a 4/3 creature with haste. Big deal. I guess 2 of them. 2 4/3 creatures with haste in Bushido 1. Whoop-de-doo, right? Again, even if you're breaking the rules of the game and rule zeroing both of these guys into the command zone, it still isn't really that good, right? So that's really the funny part about this one. On top of that, a lot of people have done Brothers Yamazaki decks, but guess what? They're in the 99. So this is another situation where it would actually be way easier to not play this guy as your commander and just do Brothers Yamazaki in the 99 and then do like a copy clone theme where you can make a whole bunch of copies. I actually had a patron with a deck like that where it's a copy clone theme and they're just making copies of Brothers Yamazaki, again, without the legend rule. Because of course you can only have exactly 2 permanents named Brothers Yamazaki. So if you have 3 and they all kill each other, well, down to 1 anyway. So you got to build around that as well. Again, if you actually wanted to do that, you probably would never do this as your commander. You would do it in the 99. Really not worth the payoff, in my opinion. Iwamori of the Open Fist is a funny one. And again, this is one that fits into the category of, okay, well, even if you did find a way to make it work, it kind of undoes itself. So 2 green, human monk, 5/5 with trample. And again, this guy does not have 0 decks on EDH Rec. So I'm curious how people are playing it. When Iwamori of the Open Fist enters, each opponent may put a legendary creature card from their hand onto the battlefield. So of course, that's terrible, typically. Terrible, because of course you're risking the possibility of your opponents putting a legendary creature into play. Okay, but what if they don't have a legendary creature? Right, so now, again, doesn't matter direction you go here, to me it seems like it's not worth it. If you actually are building around, let's say you're making a hug deck and you want your opponents to put a legendary creature card from their hand into play when your commander enters. Okay, well, what if they don't have any? It's very likely that none of your opponents have a legendary creature. So now you've cast your commander and that ability has done nothing. So you just have a 5/5 trample creature. Boring. Again, are you building around that? Maybe, maybe not. Regardless of the situation of if you don't want them to put a legendary creature into play, that doesn't seem worth it because now you just have a 4 mana 5/5 trampling creature, which by today's standards is not very good and also in Commander is not very good. But if you want them, if you're building around that ability of that you want them to put a legendary creature in play, what if they don't have one, right? What if you're doing the Huggy theme and they don't have one? Now you've wasted your time doing that. What if you've built around it somehow? You want your opponents to put creatures into play. I don't even, like if you had an Containment Priest scenario, but in mono green, that doesn't work either because it's a May. Your opponents don't even have to do it. So if you have that Containment Priest in play and you play this, they'll just go, okay, well, I'm not going to put my legendary creature in play because it's just going to get exiled. So they don't have to do it. You're not forcing them to do anything either. So there really is just nothing to build around here, in my opinion. Daughter of Autumn is really a funny one. This ability is probably, it's for sure is one of the worst abilities ever on a legendary creature as far as trying to figure out a way to use it. 2 green, Avatar, 2/4. Pay a white. So thankfully, again, this was printed way before the Commander format, but maybe they were thinking ahead here where we actually have a white ability on this commander. So this is a Selesnya commander. That is important, very important in fact, because the next 1 damage that would be dealt to target white creature this turn is dealt to Daughter of Autumn instead. This is one that was suggested to me on my Underwhelming Commander series that I don't think I ever actually did because, again, there's just nothing to do here. The amount of work you would have to put into to actually do something with this commander I don't know if it would ever make it worth it. So obviously you can have a bunch of white creatures in the deck. In fact, maybe you could only have white creatures in the deck. And okay, then all I'm doing is redirecting damage to Daughter of Autumn. That, if I'm just doing that, I have a white creature, I want to get in for damage with it, and Daughter of Autumn is going to redirect damage from that creature to my Daughter of Autumn, and it's going to save that creature. If I wanted to just prevent damage to my creatures or redirect damage from my creatures in mono white, I don't even need green here. Just in mono white alone, there's 1,000 easier ways to do that, right? I can just put a Dolmen Gate in my deck. That's a colorless option. Dolmen Gate in my deck, preventing damage to my creatures, right? If I wanted to somehow redirect damage to my Daughter of Autumn, okay, now I guess I can build around that, right? And again, I'm trying to come up with ways to do it. I can put stuff on my commander that wants it to be dealt damage, I guess. How much of payoff do we have there? And even if I did do that, all right, so what's that? What's a Druid's Call? What's that green enchantment that does whenever your creature does dealt damage, you create that many squirrels? Okay, so we throw that on a Daughter of Autumn. But now we're getting into the same situation. There's so many hoops to jump through here. I attack with my creature and my opponents block it, and then I can redirect damage to my Daughter of Autumn. Okay, but hold on, my opponents know what I'm going to be doing, so they just won't block my creature, I guess, right? So whatever the payoff here is that I'm looking for, my opponents are probably not going to oblige me. They're just going to say, I'm not going to block your creature, I'll just take the 2 damage or whatever, right? You could probably get into some fantastic scenarios here. Your commander's ability actually works on all white creatures, not just yours. So you could get a Painter's Servant in play, make everyone's creatures white, have, anytime any creature is being dealt damage, it can be redirected to your Daughter of Autumn. Again, you're going to have to leave a ton of white mana open all the time, just in case, which is another huge drawback here. And then again, your commander dying is going to be a huge issue because it's always taking damage. What's the payoff? There's so much that needs to be done here in order to make this commander worth it. And I just don't think there's a big enough payoff there. You could get into some funny scenarios. Sure, absolutely. But for me, the funny scenarios that you could get into require a whole lot of pieces that wouldn't even win you the game or even get you close to winning the game. They would just be like some silly little shenanigans, right? So not worth the squeeze, in my opinion. All right, getting into the commanders, and we're getting worse and worse as we go here because these are commanders that are entirely built around what your opponents are doing. Those are the commanders that, in my opinion, are the hardest to build around. If your commander relies on what your opponent is doing in a very specific way, it makes it so that it is almost impossible to build around. You just got to get lucky, or you just got to have the right play group, right? So Irini Sengir is one of them, 2 black, vampire dwarf, interestingly enough. So I guess you could do some vampire tribal or maybe mono black dwarf tribal. It's a 2/2 and has green enchantment spells and white enchantment spells cost 2 less to cast. So literally this card does nothing unless your opponents are playing green and white. I guess if they're playing green and white, there's, I would say it's a guarantee that they are going to cast enchantments. But again, that's all you're getting for your commander is I cast my commander and then it sits there. And if my opponent casts a Smothering Tithe, now he has to pay 6 mana for it. I guess if you're in a play group where all your buddies play Smothering Tithe, again, that scenario is always the case. If you're in the play group where this thing happens, this commander is usable. But then I go play with some other group and it just becomes really bad. Again, in the Painter Servant scenario, I can play a Painter Servant and just have all enchantments cost 2 more. Okay, again, is that worth it? Is that worth the hoops you're jumping through just to have enchantments cost a little bit more? Your enchantments are going to cost more too, by the way. You're again in the situation where you're just going to annoy your opponents. They're just going to be like, oh, you're making my enchantments cost 2 more? I'll just kill your commander. So, right, I'm in the situation of I'm jumping through hoops to basically annoy my opponents and make them want to kill my really bad commander that already isn't giving me much of an advantage. So not worth it, in my opinion, what you're going to be doing with this commander. I really don't think there's any great way to build around this. All right, next up, Major Teroh. And again, another commander that is completely reliant on what your opponents are doing. And another commander, funny enough, where Painter Servant is a great fit. And I will just point out, Painter Servant used to be banned in the format. A lot of people probably don't know that. And they unbanned banned it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm so glad they did because, yeah, again, this commander is almost unplayable. But if you were going to use it, you could put Painter Servant in the deck to make it a little more effective. That's why I like cards like Painter Servant available in the format. It makes some of these really bad commanders a little more viable. So 3 and a white, bird, soldier, 2/3. And I will point out, as with all these commanders, yes, you could do bird tribal, you could do soldier tribal, sure. Great. But there's a million other options. So why would you use this one? You're going to use this one because you actually want to use the ability, I assume, anyway, right? Pay 3 white, sacrifice Major Teroh, exile all black creatures. Why would you ever play this as your commander? This is a card that is actually maybe okay in the 99. Again, if I'm doing a bird or soldier tribal deck, you could put this in the 99. If you're in a play group again where you got a lot of opponents that play black creatures, sure, okay. But as a build around, it's just not worth it at all. Yes, you could just have this, again, if your play group plays a lot of black decks, it's still not worth it. It's just a really bad board wipe. I'm paying 4 mana and then another 5 mana, so 9 mana total to exile just the black creatures. And even if all my opponents are playing all mono black decks, I just paid 9 mana for a one-sided board wipe. Guess what? There's already board wipes that are doing that. Probably better ones, in fact. You're in white, so you have some of the best board wipes available to you already. You can just play Winds of Abandon and exile all your opponent's creatures for 6 mana, right? Again, it's just not worth any hoops you might be jumping through, even if I do the Painter Servant thing. Okay, well, now all creatures are black, including mine, and I'm going to end up exiling my own Painter Servant, so I'll never see that again. And I'm jumping through all of these hoops just for a board wipe. Why would you do that? You wouldn't. I don't think it's worth it. Rashka the Slayer, 3 white, human archer, 3/3 with reach. So again, the stats here come into play a little bit. You have a 3/3 reach creature for 5 mana, which is just god awful by today's standards. Again, I know it's not her fault that power creep is a thing, but it does kind of play into it a little bit here. But again, this is another commander that relies entirely on what if there's anything to build around here, it's this one ability that relies entirely on what your opponents are doing. When Rashka the Slayer blocks 1 or more black creatures, Rashka gets +1/+2 until end of turn. Like if there was ever a more useless ability, sorry, there are some more useless abilities in Commander. They're coming up next, but we're really getting to the ones that it's like, why would you ever do this, right? Again, not only do you have to rely on your opponents playing black creatures, so again, maybe we can throw the Painter Servant in there, so all my opponent's creatures are black. Okay, but I got to block. This is not even attacking. I have no control over this. I have to have my opponents attack me in order to use my commander's ability. And if they do, it's got reach, so at least I can block just about anything. But at the end of the day, all I get is a +1/+2. All the work that I'm going to put in here, the build around that I'm going to put in here is only so that my commander gets a +1/+2 when it blocks one of my opponent's creatures. Terrible. Talk about relying entirely on what your opponents are doing here. Rashida Scalebane, 3 white, human soldier, 3/4. Tap, destroy target attacking or blocking dragon. It can't be regenerated. You gain life equal to its power. So again, relying entirely on what your opponents are doing. I will point out though, unlike Rashka, where you have to have your opponent attack you, here you don't have to have your opponent attack you. They can be attacking each other. It just has to be, or blocking, I guess. It just has to be an attacking or blocking dragon that anyone controls, and you are gaining life equal to its power. It's a great ability against a dragon deck. Again, if your playgroup, we're always going to be in this scenario where if your playgroup's doing that thing, it'll be a lot better. But if I'm just building a random deck, a random commander that I'm trying to build around that I'm going to take to my LGS and play, better be a lot of people playing dragon decks here. There is one card, only one that I am aware of, that will actually work in this scenario, Shields of Velasvel. If you're in blue, there is some ways to do some creature type changing stuff. Doing it on yourself, of course, there are various ways, but if you want to change your opponent's creatures into certain creature types, Shields of Velasvel is the way. 1 white mana, Kindred instant shapeshifter, changeling. So it is itself changeling, which can be very relevant. Creatures target player controls get +1/+0 and gain all creature types until end of turn. So you can use this on yourself as well. Again, this is a great card for a lot of reasons. You can use it to make all your, it's a one-time Maskwood Nexus for yourself, or a Maskwood Nexus for your opponent's creatures, which is very relevant, of course. So that's the one thing, the only thing I can come up with that you can do with your Rashida Scalebane deck is I use that, which again, in mono white, there is, I don't know if there's any way to get it back out of the graveyard and use it again, but my opponent's attacking with a big creature. I turn their creature into a dragon and then kill it with my commander and gain some life, and that's it. And then the rest of the game, I'm just sitting there doing nothing. Again, jumping through all those hoops, and you can't even search for Shields of Elisval. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's no way to search for it in mono white. There's no way to get it out of your graveyard and do it again. Just not worth at all what you're doing here. Really, really terrible commander to build around. Very similarly, and also from Mirage, Hivis of the Scale 3, red, Lizard Shaman 3/4. You may choose not to untap Hivis of the Scale during your untap step. Tap, gain control of target dragon for as long as you control Hivis and Hivis remains tapped. So doing a very similar thing, you're just, again, relying entirely on your opponents to be playing dragons. Here you can gain control of them, which, I don't know, maybe some would say is better, some would say is worse. If I'm playing against the dragon tribal deck, I would say Rashida is better because I can keep using it over and over here. I can only steal one dragon at a time. So even if you are in the perfect scenario of my opponent is playing an Dragon deck, or I have, another opponent plays a Mirim deck or something, I still can only gain control of one dragon at a time. That's pretty bad. I mean, I guess I could sacrifice it, then let my commander untap, take another one, and now I'm again in the other scenario where I'm stealing my opponent's stuff, which they hate, and now they're going to hate me and kill my commander. So again, I'm going through the trouble of doing all of this work so that my opponents can just hate me and kill my commander. That doesn't seem worth it. Let's piss off the guy playing the Dragon deck. That sounds like a good idea, right? Not worth it at all. But again, if by some crazy chance you actually are playing this commander, Blades of Velasvel is sort of the red version of what I'm talking about here. Again, a 1 and a red instant with Changeling and up to 2 target creatures. Each get +2/+0 and gain all creature types until end of turn. So this is a way to change your opponent's creatures into a certain creature type. So you can use that in your Hivis of the Scale deck if you have that deck. One-time use again. I think maybe you can get it back out of your graveyard in red. I don't think you can search for it though. So it's a one-time use. I gain control of my opponent's creature. Ooh, not really worth it, I don't think. Getting towards the end here, and these are getting worse and worse as they go. Nebuchadnezzar, I believe it's pronounced that way. 3 black and a blue human wizard 3/3. And this is a golden oldie for sure. And yeah, maybe you just like that really awesome Richard Kane Ferguson art. That's one reason to play this commander. Other than that, I can't think of much because this ability is so tough to use in a commander game. Pay X and tap. Choose a card name. Target opponent reveals X cards at random from their hand. Then that player discards all cards with the name revealed this way. Activate only during your turn. Oh boy. So again, we have a 5 mana commander that has a tap ability. So you're going to have to wait a whole nother turn to use it. Again, even if you had Lightning Greaves or 1,000-Year Elixir or anything like that, it wouldn't matter because you have to pay 5 for your commander and you have to sink a bunch of mana into the ability. So, okay, and I have Training Grounds. Okay, that makes it a little cheaper, but it still doesn't make it good. We go through this scenario of I'm jumping through all these hoops to try to make this ability good, and the payoff is what? I force my opponent to discard 1 card, right? Regardless of the amount of hoops you can jump through to make that ability good, whether it be, I have tons of mana, so the X doesn't matter anymore. I have untappers, so I can use the ability more than once. At the end of the day, all you're going to do is make your opponent discard 1 card. You're discarding all cards with the same name revealed this way. Guess what? The same name thing doesn't work in Commander. You have to figure out what's in your opponent's hand to begin with. There are ways to do that, but again, now we're building around that. So we're building around untapping our commander, making the ability cost not so much, knowing what's in our opponent's hand, all of this stuff. And for what? Just to maybe have them discard 1 card. I actually had a patron send me this on a deck doctor, which is why I realized how difficult this is to build around. Because I thought, okay, well, maybe you could pay X is 0 and just tap this just to look at your opponent's hand. No, you doesn't even get that. Glasses of Urza is better than Nebuchadnezzar for doing that. Just tap it, look at opponent's hand. If you want to just look at your opponent's hand, that's easy to do in the commander format. Here, this doesn't even work because if you X is 0, target opponent reveals 0 cards at random from the hand. So it doesn't even do anything. So you have to put mana into this in order for it to do anything at all. Even if you can manage to make your opponent discard some cards and get down to say 2 cards in hand, still I have to put 2 mana into this to have them reveal both of those cards to get the one I'm talking about. Because even if I know what's in their hand, I can still choose 3. And if they have 4 cards in hand, maybe they won't reveal the one that I have chosen because it's at random. And all of that work building around this ability just to have my opponent discard a card. I mean, this is the very definition of the juice isn't worth the squeeze. The payoff here is, yay, I actually got my commander to do its thing. That's it. You get to pat yourself on the back. because just having your opponent discard a card or two is, I mean, just in the commander form, again, that's why nobody really does that. Just having target opponent discard a card isn't very good in the commander format. That's why nobody plays Thoughtseize in the commander format. Super busted card in other formats, nobody plays in a commander, because that getting target opponent to discard a card isn't very good at all. Really, really terrible build around here. But not the worst. The worst ever. I think I found it. The worst ever commander to build around in the commander format. And again, this guy doesn't have 0 decks. Shocking. There's actually 9 decks on EDH Rec for this guy. He's not even at the bottom, but in my opinion, he is the worst possible commander to build around. Ishi-Ishi, Akki, Crackshot. And the reason why is because, in my opinion, there is literal nothing to build around here, okay? So 1 and a red, a goblin, warrior, 1/1. And again, it's a goblin, it's a warrior. You could, if you wanted to make a really janky goblin tribal deck, have this guy as your commander. Sure. But if I actually want to build around the ability, right? That's what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about, I have a commander with a certain ability that I want to build around. What can I do? I can do nothing. There is nothing you can do here. Whenever opponent casts a spirit or arcane spell, Ishi-Ishi Crackshot deals 2 damage to that player. That's it. Again, another ability that is entirely reliant on what your opponents are doing. And this is about as fringe as it gets. This is, my opponent has to, I mean, the arcane part is just, forget about that. That might as well not even be on there. The chances your opponent cast an arcane, again, unless you have a guy in your playgroup that's actually doing that. But even that scenario, in my opinion, is terrible, because if I had a guy in my playgroup that was doing that, he's already playing a fringe strategy. And so I'm going to go out and build this deck just to screw him over. That sounds awful. Why would you do that? Right? You're going to make this guy's life harder, who already has a hard life, trying to build around the Spirit Arcane theme. And you're going to be like, I'm going to screw you over. So even that scenario is terrible, in my opinion. So the other scenario is, I actually want to build around this commander. Well, this commander requires you entirely to rely on what your opponents are doing. Spirit is a relatively popular creature type in the commander format. But again, we've gone through all this trouble for what? For the fact that maybe my opponent will cast a Selfless Spirit in a game and I'll do them 2 damage. Whoop-de-doo. So, right? And how often is my commander just going to sit there doing absolutely nothing? Why would you want a commander that does that? I have a commander that just sits there doing absolutely nothing in 90% of games. What's the point? Like, what is the point? I'm just playing this commander for the off chance that someone's going to play a Spirit Arcane spell in a commander game. Right? Doesn't seem worth it. Funny enough, if this card was whenever any player casts a Spirit Arcane spell, it actually might be better, because then you could build around it. Why would you want to deal yourself damage? I don't know. There are reasons to do that. That would be a funny way to go with this commander. For me, that's an easier build around. It's an easier build around to have this guy be whenever any player casts a Spirit Arcane spell, because then I can cast Spirit Arcane spells, deal myself damage, put a Pariah Shield on something. Okay, yeah, like I put a Pariah Shield on my Stuffy doll and then just sit there casting Spirit Arcane. Right there, there's something. And that actually is worth the squeeze, in my opinion, because I can, start throwing damage around. It's kind of a win con. It's still not great, but at least it's something. Here, you really have nothing. There's nothing here at all except the incidental scenario of maybe my opponent will cast an E-Spirit or Arcane spell in a commander game. And all I get to do is just do 2 damage to them. Worst build around commander in the format, I think. All right, there you go. Even for a guy who likes the challenge. And funny enough, as I was going over some of these, I was kind of coming up with some ideas as I went. But still, in my opinion, even if you can come up with a way to build around some of these commanders, just doesn't seem worth it to me, other than, you get to pat yourself on the back for actually accomplishing something. Like with Ishi-Ishi, it's like, someone actually cast an arcane spell. Yeah. That's it. That's all you got, right? Other than that, what are you doing in your deck, right? Why is that your commander? That's your commander on the off chance that someone casts a Spirit Arcane spell in a commander game, right? Irini is your commander because, likely, I guess, someone would cast a green or white enchantment in a commander game, and you can just annoy them by making them wait a couple more turns to cast it. It doesn't seem like a great game plan. It doesn't seem like a great build around. Again, any of these commanders could be a method 2 commander, where your deck is built around something different and you're just using Irini to slow your opponents down a little bit. Or, one of these other commanders, maybe you're using Arashi as the game plan in my deck doesn't deal with flying creatures very well. So I'll put Arashi in the command zone. So if that situation arises where I'm playing against an Angel Tribal deck, I can use Arashi to board wipe. The method 2 thing works here a little bit. Certainly the method 3 thing works here, where I'm not building around my commander at all, right? If you're a guy who's like, I have an Arashi deck, but I just never use them. It's just, like, why does it matter? It's a command zone. Then I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about in this video is commanders that you're actually actively method one trying to build around and have a deck centered around that commander. Most of these, either what are you going to do? There's nothing you can do, or all the hoops you would have to jump through is not worth what you're going to get out of it at the end of the day. So that's my opinion. Please let me know in the comments below if you are actually using one of these commanders successfully, I would say, and what you're doing with it. I'd love to know. Prove me wrong. I would love to be proven wrong with any of these commanders, but in my opinion, these are the hardest commanders to build around in the entire commander format. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.